Yeah.
Okay, you can hear me now?
Yes,
Yes.
sir. You are audible.
Yes. Good day and evening to all of you, wherever you are. First of all, let me thank the Global Forum on Diaspora and Transnationalism, especially my friend Sada, and also the Migrant Forum in Asia, joint organizers, for this invitation for the lecture. Now, I would like to, I must mention that the topic given to me initially, I have modified it. And my presentation is mainly oriented to the people who have registered for this course. I would like to share the screen if that is possible. Okay. Yes. Yes. Again, the topic is, of course, multilateral global processes, mechanisms, and stakeholders in international migration. Oh, sorry, what happened? Sir,
we are able to see.
It went to, it became smaller, yeah. But I can, yes. I must clarify that the multilateral includes anything more than 2 countries. So it obviously includes regional. But I deal only with global process because there is a separate presentation due on regional processes by Paddy, as I know. So I will first start with some terminology and then talk about global governance and its normative foundations, and then global governance architecture, multilateral institution initiatives in international migration, and then talk about multilateral forums, and then other stakeholders, trade unions, employers, civil society. Yes, let us get the terms right. The ILO had this dictum, labor is not a commodity. The Philadelphia Declaration clearly mentions that. So we should not use terms like labor exports, imports, exporting, importing. These are inappropriate. And also more neutral terms, instead of sending and receiving countries, the international community now uses countries of origin or source countries, countries of destination or host countries. At the same time, we must remember that most countries are now all 3 countries, transit, destination, and origin countries. Many of them are in some sort of complex status. Another point I want to highlight is that we should stop labeling migrants as economic migrants, labor migrants, illegal migrants. This term economic migrants, it is actually a kind of derogatory term to describe people who join, mixed migration flows for economic reasons, not to seek actually asylum or refuge. They go under that window for better pastures. And labor migrants is not a term used in any international instrument. The right term is migrant workers. About illegal migrants, I will come next. So labor migration, migrant workers, migrant labor is what we should use. And also we should not use this term unskilled workers. International community uses low skilled or essential workers. Every worker has a skill. So it's absurd to suggest that people who cross borders, that employers hire workers without any skills. So irregular migration, migrant workers in irregular status are the correct terms, not illegal, clandestine, or undocumented. Because once you describe a person as illegal, immediately you attach a criminal connotation, stigmatize the person. But the Universal Declaration of Human Rights clearly mentions all are equal before the law and are entitled without any discrimination to equal protection of the law. Undocumented is okay, but the problem is many persons come with documents thanks to a fake documentation industry, but then they violate the conditions of those documents. Yeah. So I also want to deal with this term, safe, orderly, and regular migration. What is this? Of course, this is the language in the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda and the Global Compact on Migration. The problem with these terms, These terms focus on the process, but not on migrants or their rights or their access to decent work. Safe can mean security. We must ask, it is state security or human security. So also one can migrate safely, but get exploited at the other end. Now, according to Roger Bonning, ILO migration guru, even slave trade was very orderly, but orderly does not mean anything. Regular. We must also remember that most people who enter countries end up in irregular situations, actually cross borders in regular ways. So this term regular, irregular, we have to be very careful. So what we need actually is migration in conditions of dignity, equity, justice, and security. But the problem is we have to live with these terms. They are in the Sustainable Development Agenda. They are very much, that is the title of the Global Compact on Migration. So the important thing is to qualify them. Safe, orderly, and regular migration must be consistent with ensuring rights, decent work, justice, dignity, and well-being of migrants. I recall Paddy in her presentation actually had a nice explanation of more detailed explanation. So coming to this stakeholders, multi-stakeholders, we refer to people, all parties with a stake in migration issues. So why this multi-stakeholder partnerships participation required? This is because of the complexity of migration processes, governance and protection issues. They are very complex. We know that migrant workers suffer so many abuses and exploitation in these countries. This became very clear during the COVID epidemic. No single agency or actor, or several of them, can actually handle these issues. So we need partnerships. The GCM mentioned the whole of society approach, where they included migrants, diasporas, local communities, civil society, academia, private sector, parliamentarians, trade unions, national human rights institutions, cities, media, and others. But of course, we have to clarify. When we talk about civil society, CSOs working in different areas, human rights, humanitarian assistance, health, and many of these areas, gender, development, civil rights, they are concerned, but they may not be involved in migration networking. And also we need specific reference to employers, business organizations, and also private and public recruitment agencies and international organizations. I forgot to actually mention that I benefited from the comments of my colleagues Evelyn Tennant and also Patrick Tharan in developing especially on the civil society sections. But a weak link in this stakeholder discussions is the absence of strong migrant or migrant worker organizations at regional or even global levels. In many cases, due to repression of freedom of association rights, etc., and difficulties for migrants to organize themselves at international military levels. But it's very important to have migrants' own voice when we take decisions affecting them, when we discuss about them. So then I also want to come to this, what do we mean by governance? Governance and management, there's a difference. Management implies, because earlier there was a lot of talk about migration management, especially IOM was using this term. So when we were in the ILO, we used to prefer to use the term governance for several reasons. Because management implies states are able to unilaterally handle migration issues. It could also imply migration control instead of governance. And this term does not necessarily provide for consultative processes. So the other point is that governments are not the only actors in governance. There are many actors in governance. It's much more than government action. All concerned stakeholders, multi-actors, social partners, civil society, business, multi-levels, regional, national, global, local, and multi-mechanisms, formal, informal, and many layers of rules and implementation. Again, formal and informal. and mechanisms involved at global, national, regional levels. So international instruments provide a solid foundation for good governance of migration. So what do you mean by good governance? UN Commission of Human Rights has this document on essential elements of good governance related to human rights. Promotion of the rule of law, strengthening service delivery for human rights, democratic institution and participation, combating corruption in the public and private sectors, international cooperation. In the 70s, the early 70s, this term governance came up, especially the World Bank started using it because in their aid project development programs, they found that there was a lot of leakages due to corruption. So they said there should be actually good governance in the administration of these development aid programs. And the UN Habitat has a very good definition. I will show you a diagram. And what it also means is corruption is minimized, views of minorities taken into account, voices of the most vulnerable in society are heard, responsive to present and future needs of society. So consensus-oriented, accountable, transparent, responsive, equitable and inclusive, effective and efficient, follow the rule of law and participatory. I don't think there's any dispute about these attributes. So in relation to migration, what do we mean by good governance? The ILO monograph, International Labour Migration Rights-Based Approach in 2010, has this several criteria: consistency with international norms and rule of law, policy coherence across the government, and transparency, clear rules and procedures, inclusive and participatory, consultative and consensus-oriented, gender sensitive, legitimate and accountable, and evidence-based. So now I want to discuss what is the rights-based approach. Sorry. I recall when we were debating the ILO multilateral framework in 2005 at the ILO, a senior delegate from a government got up, from a developed country, got up and asked, what do you mean by rights-based approach? Does it mean any person in the world can walk into my country without a visa? Of course, this is not what we mean by rights-based approach, because Professor Singh in his lecture mentioned two rights, universal human rights. The fact that people can leave their own country, it's a universal human right, and also people can return to his or her own country. But of course, there is a third right, which is very important for a right to migrate. That is the right of admission to a third country. You can leave your own country, but if you cannot get admitted to a third country, then your departure is useless. So that right, no country has surrendered under any international treaty. That is the right of sovereignty, principle of sovereignty. So who enters, who stays, who works, who lives, who gets deported, depends on each country, the immigration laws and regulations. So this is why these two universal human rights actually stop short of defining a right to migration. So, but we know that during the pandemic, even citizens, mobility is very restricted. People cannot leave their countries, and also even citizens cannot return to their countries. Australia does not allow people stranded, their citizens stranded abroad, to come without clearance. The Swiss philosopher Max Frisch once remarked, "We wanted workers, but we got people." The point I made earlier, that migration is different from trade in commodities. So rights-based approach recognizes that migrants have human and labor rights, regardless of their legal status, background, or skills. And also it's directly linked to rights based on international law norms. So there is accountability of duty bearers, states, employers, and host society to honor, respect these rights and enforce these rights. And rights holders have to be also empowered. They have to be aware of the rights. They have to claim rights. Migrant workers, for instance. Effective and inclusive participation of migrants to adequately reflect their concerns and experiences. That is very important. Non-discrimination and equal treatment. These are core values in international instruments. Attention to vulnerable groups who need special support. And establishing a platform for cooperation. So what are the normative foundations of good governance are the international instruments. I deal with this because I don't think any of the previous presentation, special lectures dealt with that. There are 9 universal human rights instruments and associated protocols of the United Nations, which apply to all persons, including migrant workers. Like, the CEDAW, International Convention, and these are widely ratified. ILO 8 fundamental core conventions, which apply to forced labor, child labor, non-discrimination, and freedom of association. And these are also widely ratified. And if you look at the ground situation in most countries, especially in the Gulf, even in other countries, migrant worker rights violated are basic rights. They are being forced into forced labor practices. There's widespread discrimination. They are not allowed to form unions. Their basic human rights are violated. So even Gulf countries and others have widely ratified. So this is one opening for the countries. And there are 3 specific international migrant worker conventions, the 2 ILO conventions, Migration for Employment 1949, Migrant Worker Convention number 143, the first international convention to cover workers in irregular status, and of course the International Convention on the Protection of the Rights of All Migrant Workers, 1990. But ILO position is that all other labor standards apply to migrant workers unless it specifically stated otherwise. So Private Employment Agencies Convention, Harassment Convention, Domestic Worker Convention, they apply. And then there are non-binding normative frameworks, ILO Multilateral Framework on Labor Migration, 2006. This is a toolkit for governments and stakeholders to improve migration policies, revise migration policies and laws. And also General Principles and Operation Guidelines for Fair Recruitment, 2016 and 19. Yeah. So what is the record on ratification of international migrant worker instruments? So the ILO Migration for Employment Convention, globally, 50 ratifications. 11 EU countries have ratified. Portugal and Italy have ratified both conventions. In Asia, only 5 countries. And ILO Migrant Workers Convention, only 25. Very few ratifications. This is the one covering irregular workers. And UN Convention, 56 ratifications, quite a number since 2000, since the year 2000. And in Asia, 4 countries have ratified. And ILO Private Employment Convention, 34, Domestic Worker Convention, only 35. What is striking is Philippines is the only country in Asia which has ratified all 3 migrant worker conventions, and also the only country in Asia to ratify the Domestic Worker Convention. So, what is the function of global framework? What are the tasks? The governance, establishing a rule of law regime on migration with domestication of international norms in national laws. Developing innovative programs for facilitating mobility and migration of workers at all skill levels. GCIM, Global Commission on International Migration, called them essential workers, in line with labor market and demographic needs. But you find is that many developed countries, destination countries, open the doors for skilled workers and shut the doors for low-skilled workers, where origin countries have a surplus. And this migration of low-skilled workers will make the greatest impact on poverty alleviation. But this is what Nigel Harris called in 1991 in his book, Untouchables, that apartheid in relation to migration admissions, welcoming skilled workers and discrimination against low-skilled workers. Then provide for regular channels and regularization of migrant workers, which will minimize irregular migration, including smuggling and trafficking of persons. Regular migration is also due to policies of destination countries where they maintain huge informal sectors which act as a magnet for these irregular workers. And fair recruitment, involving stakeholders in policies. Protection, address the rampant abuse and exploitation of migrant workers and ensure decent work and their protection. Promote integration of migrants in host societies and eliminate discrimination, xenophobia, which has been growing in recent years due to populist growth of populist parties and others. We know about the USA under Trump administration. I mean, because President Trump's, in his speech to the United Nations, his message was, stay in your own countries, don't migrate, stay in your own countries and make them great, which means, really immobility. So what are the issues to be tackled in frameworks? Other issues, migration and development, maximize development benefits of migration, which has been talked about in earlier presentations, and more opportunities of migration of low-skilled workers, which I already talked about, address brain drain from developing countries. If you admit only skilled workers, this is the inevitable result. Promote skills development and skill recognition abroad and on return, the GCM Objective 18, and promotion of decent work opportunities in home countries to promote migration by choice, not by need, as highlighted by the Global Commission on International Migration. This is Objective 2 of the Global Commission on the GCM, and cooperation. So let me come to multilateral initiatives on migration. 1994, the Population Conference is very important. That report is one of the pioneering reports on global migration. Then during 2001 to 4, the IOM hosted what's called the Bern Initiative, Outcome International Agenda for Migration Management. It was not a negotiated agenda. Then 2004, ILO General Discussion on Migrant Workers and the related resolution concerning a fair deal for migrant workers in the global economy. I highlighted this in red because many discussions of multilateral initiatives on migration by many organizations completely ignore this initiative. This is not a simple 1 or 2 day meeting, actually. It's a 3-week discussion by all member countries of the ILO, and it's a negotiated document. And 2004 to 5, Global Commission on International Migration, supported by Swiss and Swedish governments and endorsed by the UN Secretary General. 2005 report, Migration in an Interconnected World. You should read this report, very difficult to find copies. 2006 to 2018, the Global Migration Group was established in 2000 with UN agencies and IOM at that time, which was not related to the UN. And 2006, ILO Multilateral Framework on Labor Migration, negotiated document. And 2006, UN First High-Level Dialogue on International Migration and Development. And 2007 to date, we have the Global Forum on Migration and Development. And 2013, Second High-Level Dialogue on International Migration. 2015, the launch of the Sustainable Development Agenda. 2017, ILO General Discussion on Labor Migration, the second general discussion, resolution concerning fair and effective labor migration governance. And 2016 to 18, the negotiations for the Global Compact, which you all know about. And 2018, United Nations Network on Migration established by the Secretary General. So the SDG migration targets, I think Paddy also in a previous presentation dealt with this. Because of the time, I don't want to go into all this. I only highlight targets here, 5.2, 8.8, protect labor rights and promote safe and secure working environment for all workers, including migrant workers. This is the goal related to decent work. And then I will mainly focus on 10.7, facilitate orderly, safe, and regular and responsible migration and mobility of people, including through the implementation of planned and well-managed migration policies. This is what gave rise to actually to the GCM also, this orderly, safe, and regular. And there are two indicators, 10.7.1, recruitment costs borne by an employee as a proportion of the monthly income earned in the country of destination. ILO and the World Bank are the two custodians for this. They have not still measured it. They are doing some surveys. The point is, this has no target, but I think the idea is the lower the ratio, the better. But of course, the ILO conventions, instruments mention that there should be zero recruitment cost. So the ideal will be zero indicator. But and then there's 10.7.2, number of countries with migration policies to facilitate orderly, safe, and regular and responsible migration and mobility of people. UNDESA and IOM are the joint custodians of this. In my personal view, I think this should have been reversed. ILO should have actually taken over this migration policies, given its rights-based framework and normative framework. And IOM should have handled with the World Bank this measurement issue about recruitment cost. Yeah. Then there's about reducing to less than 3% the transaction cost of migration remittances. Yeah. And I think we still focus on this cost, remittance cost and remittances, but not about the humans, the migrants who actually transfer these remittances. In my personal view, remittances represent the blood, sweat, and tears of millions of poor migrant workers. They sacrifice so much actually to earn and remit this money. Okay, I have given the 10.7.2 SDG indicator. There is a measurement by UNDESA, IOM, along with OECD. I just highlight here for various regions they have given it. This is a little surprise for Central and Southern Asia. They say 80% of the countries meet the fully target. Globally, 54%. Latin America and the Caribbean, 79% of the countries. This is the problem with this self-reporting by the countries. They use 5 criteria. You have to go into details. From our common sense knowledge about policies in South Asia and the Central Asia, I find it a little difficult to believe this high optimistic figures. So SDG monitoring and implementation, I included this because this is where I know these multilateral discussions, consultations take place. It's even a high-level political forum on sustainable development, main global forum for review. Voluntary national reviews, VNRs, member states conduct them. It's very important, the success, challenges, and lessons. It's very important to see how migration is dealt with in these reports, because I looked at some and there is hardly any discussion of migration issues in this. And then they have regional preparatory meetings, thematic reviews, and also regular reviews by the high-level platform every year using the VNR as a basis, and every 4 years under the UN General Assembly. And there are annual SDG progress reports. Yeah, GCM reviews. I'm not going to actually describe GCM because you have been discussing it all this time, and I'm not going to talk about objectives because that is you have specialist panels on each objective. I think you have discussed up to now, heard about 70 panels. So here only about the review, follow-up and review. So the partners in implementation, we already mentioned that, and member states are encouraged to conduct regular and inclusive reviews of progress made at the national level, not alone, but in collaboration with all stakeholders, civil society, social partners. And sub-regional, regional, and cross-regional processes also invited to review the implementation of the compact. Regional economic communities and also regional consultative processes and regional civil society and trade union federations. And also formal regional reviews to be organized by UN regional commissions. They were planned in 2020, but they have been postponed. UN EC review was held. Every 4 years, Global International Migration Review Forum, and first will be in 2022. It will be organized around 4 round tables. And now I come to the UN Network on Migration. It was set up by the UN Secretary General following the GCM adoption. It replaces the Global Migration Group, which was active during 2006 to 18. It's a loose network of all UN agencies and IOM at the time. But this is different. This has a permanent secretariat and governed by an executive committee. Purpose: to ensure effective, timely, and coordinated system-wide support to member states on migration as they respond to the Global Compact. Since the GCM is rooted in the SDG agenda, this means the network will also support SDGs. Coordinator and Secretariat is the International Organization for Migration mentioned in the GCM document itself by the governments. 38 UN members and the Executive Committee. They have capacity building mechanism, connection hub, starter fund for financing migration-related projects at the country or regional levels, global knowledge platform. And they have also, to strengthen civil society links, they have appointed a civil society liaison officer, Monami Maulik, who was the coordinator of the Global Coalition on Migration. They have regular multi-stakeholder consultations, and regional and national networks are being formed. So it has working groups, common working groups and thematic working groups on data, regular pathways, which is quite important, bilateral migration agreements, returns, reintegration. But what you find is actually there is not much enough focus on migrant rights. The protection is one of the burning issues. I mean, this is where countries need help to how to deal with the issue of protecting their migrant workers in overseas destinations. This is where they need more help. Then GCM review by countries up to now. It's important to progressively incorporate global compact objectives into new legislation, policies, and practice, especially because they are non-binding. Countries in most regions have been working on these issues, decent work for migrants, fair recruitment, skill development, diaspora, remittances, return, migration data. For past 2-3 decades, countries have been working on this. So what is the difference? What is the value added by the GCM? What momentum? This is what we have to actually see, and how it will be done. These things will be intensified under the initiative. Origin countries are keen on follow-up, as we can see from some national level plans, but commitments in destination countries largely unknown. GCC countries, I haven't seen any indications of plans. Challenges, we have to admit that there has been very limited time for implementation, just 1 year in 2019, and then the COVID came. The pandemic has stalled the follow-up of GCM by most countries. Many countries actually are dealing with immediate problems of the pandemic and migrant workers. And the lack of coordination between government agencies is a problem in follow-up to the GC, as some countries have been complaining. So the GCM is also following up with champions of the Global Compact. Already, actually 15 countries have so far committed, become champions. Among developed countries, Canada, Portugal, and then in Asia, these countries. So GCM provides a roadmap, a first step to be implemented over the years. So what are the issues with the GCM, I earlier also mentioned, it's the focus on process, but of course, various objectives deal with other. So one area is the limited role given to ratification of conventions. Coming under the auspices of the UN, the ICHR International Convention should have received more emphasis. Ratification is mentioned only under Objective 6, but not naming any convention. The non-binding nature and too many objectives without identifying any priorities. Of course, the logic is that each country has to identify their own priorities. But then, what happens, because I saw that in the case of Laos, they have identified Objective 1, data, and Objective 17, cooperation, as the priorities. I thought this was quite strange for a country like Laos to select those two areas. Unclear role of Global Forum on Migration and Development. And the document adjusts many of options, and then it defeats the nature of integration of some objectives. No commitment to develop indicators or to measure progress of objectives. And regarding the UN network on migration, some have voiced the concern, some researchers. IOM, a non-normative organization, has been made coordinator and secretariat of this. And some countries also are concerned that their state-led process is being dominated by UN network, especially the UAE delegate I mentioned at once, because they were concerned about this regional, national level forums being formed for what is believed to be a state-level process. So the global governance still has institutional gaps. In 2001 Doyle report appointed by the Secretary General said no single agency covers all aspects of migration, which is still true. ILO clear mandate on labor migration and protection of migrant workers. UN Commissioner on Human Rights, Asylum Seekers and Refugees mandate. Human Rights, ICHR, Human Rights of Migrants. IOM, Intergovernmental Organization servicing members governments, now UN-related organization. It's a non-normative organization with no protection mandate. And they also mention themselves as UN Migration Agency, which is not really factual because the UN gave them the option to become a specialized agency, but the governments, the member states did not want that. So they are a UN-related agency like the WTO, World Trade Organization, or International Atomic Energy Authority, not an agency or a UN organization. Then UN DESA, mainly for data and backstopping some processes. UNDOC about migration, trafficking and smuggling protocols. UNDP, migration and development issues. So ILO and migration, UN, of course, some of you may be already familiar. UN Specialized Agency on Labor Matters has a unique tripartite structure among UN agencies. Governments, employers, and workers' organizations. It's the only agency with a constitutional mandate to protect migrant workers and has pioneered international labor standards. Means of action, standard setting, advocacy, technical cooperation, knowledge base on migration issues, and mandate reinforced by the Decent Work Agenda, Fair Migration Agenda, further by the resolution and the ILO Centenary Declaration. But of course, compared to earlier times, some of this focus on soft law frameworks and the more recent resolutions are not as strong as the 2004 resolution. And also the fair migration also is not a very clear concept. It's vaguer than other earlier concepts. Then IOM, Intergovernmental Organization, wide network. It has a very wide network which is in over 100 countries, active in many countries. Many countries actually know about IOM. It was set up in 1951 as a provisional governmental committee, movement of migrants from Europe, Actually, by the USA to counter ILO and UNHCR role in managing transfer of surplus labor from Europe to a new world. There's a very interesting article by Karatani about how history separated migrants and refugees. You must read that. I have given the reference later, which traces the history and all these conflicts between IOM, ILO, and this. It was named IOM in 1989. Objectives ensure orderly and human management of migration. And you can see where this term orderly came from. And also to promote international cooperation and provide humanitarian assistance. So it covers most aspects of migration, forced migration, IDPs, etc. And also knowledge and data generation. It is a service agency. It started as a logistics agency, but now it's expanded all the scope. It still has a service function for the member states. It's a key humanitarian actor, knowledge generation, World Migration Reports, you are familiar, Global Data Migration Portal, International Dialogue Migration, and this IRIS platform on recruitment. So its emphasis on operational work rather than on normative political guidance gives it a reputation as an efficient, results-oriented, flexible organization. It promotes regional consultative processes in different regions. And no protection mandate, as I mentioned, and continues under the same constitution after being loosely affiliated to the UN as a related organization. ICHR focuses on human rights of migrants and human rights instruments. ICRMW said are very important for migrant protection. And the Committee on Migrant Workers meets under that. It's the supervisory mechanism for the Migrant Worker Convention, review national reports of ratifying countries. And also it provides general comments. Unfortunately, up to now, only 4 general comments. It was established in 2004. Up to now, unlike other treaty bodies, it has not been that active. A special rapporteur on the human rights of migrants provides periodic reports on thematic issues and country visit reports. It performs a very good complementary function with ILO standards-based work. So GATS Mod 4, I actually included it because there was a question in one of the, during Professor Singh's presentation, and there was no satisfactory discussion at the time. It is there is a movement of people under Mode 4 of GATS, which is called Movement of Natural Persons, as temporary service providers. Actually, the GATS does not call it migration, it's trade-in services. People go as self-employed persons, a lawyer going to another country, or a university professor going and giving some lectures in another university for a limited period of time, or a company employer from India, IT employer, going and providing an IT service. I mean, this kind of people movement of theirs. These are strictly temporary movements and also service providers. If they are not allowed to access the labor market as other migrants. So it's a multilateral process. Countries can make these concessions available to countries, but there is what is called most favored nation clause. They cannot be selective. If you make a concession to one country to admit workers, skilled workers or IT workers, that concession must be given to all WTO member states. In practice, concessions have been made mostly on skilled person mobility only, intra-company transfers, some health workers. And less than 5% of all trade-in services commitments come under Mode 4. India and other countries have been arguing for extension to other skill categories, low-skilled moments. But also many countries actually enter into bilateral trade agreements or bilateral migration agreements for mobility of people, bypassing the WTO because they want to bypass this MFN clause and also control the process more directly. And also WTO has no protection mandate for workers moving under that. So GFMD, set up by the first UN high-level dialogue. Actually, initially the UN idea was to establish it under the COSOC, but powerful member states were not keen, so it was established outside the UN. Since 2007, 13 summits outside the UN system, annual or biennial summits with voluntary chairs governed by Troika called past, current, and next chair. It's called a voluntary, intergovernmental, non-binding, and informal consultative process. And also the focus is narrow, migration and development issues. Open to UN system as observers, civil society also, and civil society has expanded its role over time. Basic idea is to share experiences, share best practices, have dialogue and international cooperation. And summits organized around thematic roundtables, remittances, diaspora, protection, skills. Right now, there's a 13th summit is going on, I think online. UAE is the chair. UN system provides support and inputs, IOM secretariat support. And these are the various countries which provided the. And then I come to other stakeholders, global union federations. So again, I deal with the main issues. I am a little sketchy in this treatment. International Trade Union Federation, ITUC, ILO's recognized trade union federation. Primary mission, promotion and defense of migrant worker rights and interests through cooperation with other unions, global campaigns and advocacy. Human rights activity, economic, society and workplace action, equality and non-discrimination agendas, and international solidarity advocacy agendas. They have regional organizations in many countries, so they can be much more active in partnership with the national partners and also the NGO partners. And they launched a new web platform, Migrant Recruitment Advisor Platform, to help protect migrant workers from abusive employment practices by providing them with peer-to-peer reviews about recruitment agencies in their country of origin and destination. So they can go to if they want to find out about a particular recruitment agency, they can go to this website and check on their reputation. It's being built up. And the BWI, Global Union Federation, dealing with members in building materials, construction, wood, and this is a very important federation working with partnership with other agencies. And PSI mostly with then about the private sector, employers and the private sector, there are several international guidelines on working of the private sector and its corporate social responsibility. ILO Tripartite Declaration on Principles Concerning Multinational Enterprises, ILO Resolution on Decent Work in Global Supply Chains, which is very important because many migrant workers are caught up in these supply chains. And then UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights. Then the International Organization for Employers represents ILO's tripartite partner representing employer organizations. 150 plus employer and business organizations in more than 140 countries are their members. They're actively involved in most global processes like global union federations and working with ILO on standards, advocacy, technical cooperation activities. And the UN Global Compact Voluntary Corporate Sustainability Initiative, 10 principles covering human and labor rights applicable to migrant workers as well. International NGOs and civil society. I have mentioned only the lead actors. The civil society action on migration, policy and governance, called ACT, is very important. It includes MFA, ICMC, PICUM, International Council on Voluntary Agencies, etc. And it provides information sharing on global migration policy and governance, collective and coherent civil society action, and increasing and democratizing access for civil society engagement at all levels of global migration discourse. It's a global coalition on migration, member of AC, 16 member organizations, and many international human rights NGOs focus on migrant worker protection, Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, Red Cross, Red Crescent, ICMC, IDC, etc. And PICUM is for undocumented workers. It's a very important platform. And GMPA, when I represented also global expert body doing migration research and policy development advisors. The civil society also had this document think piece, now and then 10 acts for the global compact by civil society, which is its principles are still very valid for the global compact. Migrant Forum in Asia, I want to specially mention one of the organizers of this GCM action. While it's a regional NGO network, it's proactive at international levels with participation in most platforms. And the means of action for civil society, research and recruitment, migrant worker conditions, advocacy, lobbying governments, code of practice, partnership with trade unions as needed. The issues are, of course, when you come to national and limited resources, sometimes duplication, cross-cutting work, impact not always seen. So effective migrant worker organizations and international level absurd. I mean migrant workers' own organizations. So think tanks, researchers and the media, they play a very important role in analysis of migration issues, data and trends. And there's Mixed Migration Center, which during a short time has been producing very important research. And then there are university research centers. These are only a few, there are many more. And I need more active South-based research institutes. Again, I have just mentioned a couple of examples, but there are many more. And the media, of course, has to play a very important role, not the negative role. If you look at UK and others, some of the media play a very negative role and negative stereotyping. So what is the way forward? So my message is, one message is do not put all eggs in the GCM basket. Follow, because agencies and others also have their own agendas, and also to strengthen migration governance and protection, you have to fill in the gaps. ILO especially to support countries to continue ratify and realize binding international conventions for protecting migrant rights. The Global Compact on Migration has to be strengthened, complemented by the normative and rights-based approach, more actionable commitments on regular pathways for legal migration, regularizations. We talk a lot about opening pathways, but there are very few concrete actions. In recent years, only Japan has opened up the labor market for migrant workers. And also we know that the Gulf countries have been opening up they have been open for the last 3-4 decades for low-skilled workers, but the problem is there's a big rights deficit in that labor market. And monitoring global, regional, national levels on compliance with commitments. So they have to develop indicators and try to monitor these commitments. And also countries should acknowledge contribution of migrant workers to their economies and build public consensus on the need for migrant workers. Many countries realize that migrant workers are essential workers during the pandemic, but of course they never admitted this during normal times. But still, they are not prepared to give them the dignity and respect they deserve as human beings and workers. Partnerships are very important because migration is a very complex issue, and we need greater role for migrant voice and building effective organizations. Post-COVID-19, we need to build better But I read something, especially in relation to the Gulf. They said you should not build better on poor foundations, because where you have kafala and various other poor frameworks. If you take even Malaysia, Singapore, the existing framework is so poor. So you have to build on better foundations. And also we have to remember that migration is not a long-run solution to unemployment poverty problems. So we have to promote decent work and development in countries of origin, facilitating migration by choice, not by need. Thank you very much. I stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Pesiri. And sir, what we'll do, we'll have some question answer after this. Shall we open the forum for discussion?
Yeah, please do. I'm sorry,
Okay.
I could not go through the chat box, so you have to actually.
No, we have so many few questions. So one person is asking, what is economic migrant? Jista, can you ask directly? What is the correct terminology to be used for economic migrant?
Yes, this term economic migrant, as I mentioned actually during my presentation, it was coined to describe people who are not genuine refugees, who are going to countries in the guise of refugees or asylum seekers, but actually their motive is actually to enter the labor market. They are going for economic reasons. So, but the term economic migrant does not really suit that. I mean, because economic migrants, if you really define, they're in countries, there are opportunities for people to migrate as business persons. If you invest so much money in the country, in an enterprise, or deposit so much money in a bank, then you can go as a business migrant. That is a kind of economic migration. But what they actually, in the common discussion, what they call as economic migrant is really a person who is masquerading as a migrant, asylum seeker or refugee, not a real refugee.
Sir, we have Paddy and I think Dr. Patrick Taran, then Dr. Amba Pandey, then Dr. Smita Tiwari. I'll request you, all of you can directly ask if you have any question. Paddy? One minute. I think you are muted. One minute, Paddy. I'll just. Yes, you can. Now we can unmute.
Thank you. Thank you, Sadan. Thank you, Dr. Piasiri, for that very elaborate presentation. I think it was a fantastic rundown of a very complex multilateral system, I think, and I think you make it easy to digest and to also see the problems that come even with new frameworks such as the Global Compact for Migration, which is where my question was going to be centered around. And I think for me, I wanted, I think you rightly explained we can't put all our eggs in the basket of the GCM, but at the same time, we had been hoping, I think in 2018, that many things had been tried in terms of trying to move along to sort of take much more responsibility in terms of having a public policy that's much more receptive to migration and to migrants, and also looking at the diversity of the group there. And whether it's part of this multilateral system, what then would we do? What hope then would national actors have if a framework, which of course is not legally binding as the Global Compact for Migration, is not really materializing to what the ambitions had been set out for, like you have demonstrated, I think, in some of the other examples. And then I also wanted to find out which space can we find for local authorities, not just looking at central government level, but subnational government level, for engaging happening in these multilateral processes?
Thanks, Paddy. Yes, I'm not very sure I got your question correctly. Actually, I want to qualify because what is very important is that for the first time, governments were able to negotiate a framework for common action. This is a very important aspect about the GCM. Although it is mentioned that in the first international framework, I saw that Marriott Grange and others, they are saying that actually the first internationally negotiated framework is the International Convention in 1990, after 13 years of government negotiation, 10 years of negotiation, they came into that. So that way it's very important. What I meant was that, the countries actually can follow the GCM commitments, many countries, because unlike many others, unlike migrant worker conventions, which are not ratified in large numbers, this, despite some abstentions and, this framework was voted by, endorsed by many. So therefore they can actually work on it. At the same time, I mentioned that many of the activities in the global compact were already there. Governments were doing that. So what I'm saying is that governments can actually work on their national labor migration policies and also try to endorse migrant worker, ratify migrant worker conventions, and in their own context, follow full-fledged migration policies and see what can be done under GCM and what can be done under other programs. And your second issue, I don't think I got it very clear. That it was.
Maybe just to quickly repeat it, all these multilateral processes and the multilateral mechanisms that you have explained, what what is the role that you see in terms of local government? So we're not looking at, the ones who would participate a lot in multilateral processes would be the central government. So your ministries of foreign affairs, your ministries of home affairs, and those that are in charge at a central government level. But what are we doing in terms of bringing local governments, understanding that migrants will come and live within their cities, urban spaces, but also rural migrants would be living in municipalities. So what role do they play in terms of, ensuring that you have the voice of the local government or the subnational level?
Okay, no, that's a very good point. Actually, I did not discuss regional or local government, national or local government level. But I fully agree. I mean, because many migrants, as you rightly pointed out, end up in cities of destination countries. So mayors, cities, there are already processes actually to include cities in some of these discussions. Unfortunately, the GCM, because I remember Francois Crepeau, the former special rapporteur, saying that the compact does not give enough role to cities. I think it's very important because many of these decisions, actually, even at the national level, what the national migration policy have to be implemented at the city level or local government level. That is where the ground action takes place. So I think it's very important for them to be involved and their role to be defined in the GCM action plans. I think in some of these consultations at the national level, I have seen that they are being involved.
Okay, so can we go to Dr. Amba Pandey or maybe Dr. Patrick Taran, if we can ask anything. Dr. Raj Barduli also is there. Dr. Smita Tiwari.
Patrick is there? Yeah.
Yes, if anyone else, you can write the question in the chat box. Anyone else?
I can come in if you'd like.
Yes, please, we are waiting very eagerly.
Thank you. This is Patrick Taran here in Geneva area. And first of all, I want to just repeat a comment from the chat box to thank my colleague Pia Siri from what one colleague described as an awesome presentation. So Pia Siri, I think as already a couple of other commenters have said, I think you very well laid out a very complex panorama in relatively understandable terms. I actually want to come in with a couple of comments to build on and talk about lesser visible phenomena that's going on in the area of migration. First of all, in the terms of human rights, what I find striking is the advances that have occurred in a whole number of countries around the world in the recognition of rights of people to, in fact, enter another country, to establish residence, and to either take up employment or establish a business. And here I speak of the essentially free movement regimes that exist now in about 10 different regional communities, involving probably close to half of the total number of members of the United Nations, about 100 countries. And what I say, and I want to make this very clear, is that in fact, at least legally and conceptually, the notion of a right to migrate and a right to be somewhere else is actually recognized, at least for the nationals of countries within those communities in other countries. And I speak of the European Union, the Economic Community of West African States, the East African Community, CARICOM, the Caribbean Community, the Mercosur, the Andean Pact, also in South America, and a number of others. And I think it's pretty important to recognize these because at the same time, the development of free movement and rights to movement and establishment are not recognized. In fact, they seem to be ignored, in particular in the Global Compact, which makes almost no reference to them. I think a second comment is I'd like to pick up on Patty, your question, which I think is an excellent question regarding the role and place of local government and other than national authorities in the development of, if you will, governance of migration and protection of migrants. And in fact, the question you raise really reflects what I would call an unseen battle that's been going on at the United Nations over a number of years, where with the increasing concentration of people in large urban and not so large urban areas, and the increasing ability of those urban areas to both represent more directly their populations and better articulate what their people need, and almost all of them have articulated very clearly a rights-based approach to dealing with migrants and migration, and a welcoming approach, and you can use other terms, but they are terms of inclusivity and participation, not control, management, or exclusion. And the challenge is, in picking up on what Pia Siri just answered, Patty, to your question, is yes, in some of the international fora, mayoral councils and other bodies representing to some extent cities are being incorporated, but they're being clearly incorporated in a way that limits their representation and their authority. To put it the other way around, what's happening is cities are organizing regionally, independently, and specifically on migration. And they're finding that their representation is often limited or blocked at the UN, precisely because some countries' central governments don't represent the majorities of their populations, and where cities do more represent populations or large parts of populations, that begins to contradict what states wish to present or assure authority over in terms of the development of international policy. And if I can come back to the GCM, I think one of the challenges we face, and this is probably a topic for a much more intensive discussion, is that there are elements of the GCM and its very nature that make it perhaps counterproductive in terms of a rights-based governance of migration and protection of people than any kind of advance. And first of all is its non-binding nature. Second is it's essentially ignorance or setting aside of even saying that the international standards that apply to migration, the normative standards, should be ratified and implemented. They're only mentioned as a footnote. And even in the Global Compact on Refugees, the GCR very clearly says that the policy of the Global Compact on Refugees should be in context of implementation and realization of the 1951 Convention and 1967 Protocol on the Status of Refugees. I could say more, but I think I'll just hold it at this point because I want to introduce these, shall we say, topics or concern, and maybe suggest, particularly in terms of Patty's question, that there needs to be more space, including in this forum and these discussions, for bringing on board what's happening at city level and how cities are responding. And I saw somewhere the notion that something like 90% of all migrants, not refugees necessarily, but certainly migrants, are habiting in cities or urban spaces. And they're doing a lot and have been doing a lot for a long time. It's simply not even acknowledged, let alone recognized in some of the global fora. Anyway, thank you for the moment to make a couple of comments, and hopefully there'll be more opportunity to discuss these aspects later.
Okay, sir. Any response, or shall we go to other? Yashri, sir? If you want to give any response, or shall we go to other person to ask? Yashri, sir, are you able to hear me? I think there is some technical problem, audio problem.
Somebody raising a question? No.
No, there is observation. I thought if you want to add something, otherwise you can go to other, questions.
There must be some questions in the chat box.
Chat box, not much, but we can ask if there are Dr. I think Amba Pandey, Dr.
Yes.
Shweta Tiwari,
Yeah, enough time.
then Dr. Raj Barduli. Is there any observation from you? Or any student, if you can ask directly. I think there are some technical issues also.
Must be, otherwise.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
So can I, Raj
Yes, please.
Barduri. Thank you very much, Dr. Piaceri. I did not listen to the entire lecture. Excuse me, not feeling very well. So it was very comprehensive, and I look forward to checking your presentation when it becomes available. I have one observation, and I think you concluded it very well by saying, let's not put all our baskets in eggs in one basket, GCM. There should be simultaneous action on the part of sending countries or origin countries. In other words, origin countries need to sort out their house in terms of addressing structural unemployment problems, because everybody does not need to look out to find a way to live. This is on the part of the government, but I think on the part of the future workers, such as future immigrants, the answer is not outside, the answer is within. In other words, how to empower them to look for resources within, to improve their skills, to provide opportunities, to create opportunities for themselves, work opportunities. So the work is on several angles, not while we are discussing GCM, yes, But on the other hand, we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that this is going to be an ongoing issue. In other words, unemployment or employment creation is an ongoing issue as long as humanity or as long as labor force is added into a country. So what is a longer term? And I think you really, this was a great conclusion, and I like it very much, because I am also very much an advocate of looking for addressing structural problems, which takes a very long time. There's no quick fix. Migration may be a quick fix, should be a choice rather than a need for people to. So how does one communicate this? In other words, what is, although governments are sitting in the GCM and governments of sending countries, they are sitting there and they're listening. Yes, their workers are not being treated well. Their rights are being violated. Yes, they're bringing in some contribution. Yes, they are making some contribution to the host country. But is that the solution? In other words, has anything like that occurred from the voices of governments? I have attended civil society fora of the GCM, but not, of course, the governments. It's only some representatives of the civil societies go there and voice out. In other words, what is the mood like? How do we convey this message? How do we make it the message stronger for sending countries that you are responsible for the welfare of your people? While these instruments, conventions, declarations are there, some are as goodwill, some are, they're not legally binding. You can't take them to court for violating certain things. Of course, some, of course, you can. So mine is not a question. Mine is more like a comment and a rethink. How do we, as even GRFDT, organize fora, whereby governments are sensitized that eventually you are responsible for your own people. These instruments have been there for a while, not the GCM, but prior to that. Labor conventions have been there for a long time, and labor rights continue to be violated. Where is a deeper thinking? In other words, what are the avenues where deeper thinking can take place in these addressing the structural issues? Okay, so I mean, it's not really a question. It's like, airing out some, I'm not frustrations, but airing out some concerns that there should be talk about, there should be platform. And I think that the media has an important role to play in the sending countries, as well as in the receiving countries, to air out these issues as to what sort of progress has been made on the part of origin countries in addressing the issue of employment creation and in addressing the issue of watching out for the rights of the people that they send out. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your pertinent observations. Basically, I don't disagree with you, because it is I think it's very important for origin countries to have a vision about migration. Because we asked this question when we were when I was at the ILO, trying to help countries to develop national migration policies, ask them, in 5 years' time, 10 years' time, or 15 years' time, what is your vision? I mean, what do you, now, for instance, yes, do you still expect to send, workers to the Gulf countries in the same manner, or you have some other plans? Strangely, I mean, countries don't think along those lines. They don't really have a vision. This is, I think, quite important for countries to plan that, because migration is not a long-run solution. There is no country in the world which has exported its unemployment problem to another country, because it has to be addressed within the country. It can act as a temporary safety valve. But also other issues, as I mentioned, sending workers to the Gulf, to be exploited. We know that, we have no control over, we have bilateral labor agreements, which say nice things. But the moment a worker goes there, he will come under the sponsorship system of the sponsor, the kafala system. So he's like he's like forced labor, where he cannot leave the employment, he cannot return to the country without the permission of. So like that, there are these bilateral labor agreements are we found that very weak instruments. So it's very important for countries to see how they can actually improve skills of workers and also diversify labor markets to send workers to countries where they are not exploited. The Philippines has some certain criteria. They will send workers only to countries where there are strong laws protecting workers, national and migrant, and also which has signed a bilateral labor agreement with the country. Because what matters in the protection of workers abroad is finally the governance framework of the destination country, much more than a formal agreement. If it can protect their national workers, if they have strong labor market institutions, strong constitution, strong labor laws, that will protect workers. So in that sense, so countries should, because I believe, it's easy to say that, migration by choice, not by need. But we know that this is a luxury for many countries in the foreseeable future, because you can migrate by choice only when you reach a certain level of income, high level of living, but not when you're poor, because initially, actually, what will happen is with the economic growth, migration also will increase. So it's very important to see what role migration countries to take a vision. For instance, take this SDG goal about remittances. They say by 2030, remittance cost, transfer cost should be less than 3%. And they will eliminate corridors more than 5%. But this is a very controversial thing. I don't think it is a feasible thing. Who is going to eliminate these corridors? If people want to send workers, they will still be sending workers, whether the remittance cost is 5% or 10%, if they don't have employment opportunities locally, because we have no supranational government to implement these things. I don't know whether I actually addressed your question, but I agree with most of your observations, but my point I want to make is that countries themselves should make long-range plans, long-term plans about migration and its role in the economy and society.
Okay. So if there are no other questions, I'll be concluding now. Before I conclude, I must say Dr. Piyasiri has been a very big support for our GFRMD. Many times we consult him and always ready to help. And today talk is especially is very important because he is one of the key person in drafting the multilateral agreement from ILO side in 2006, and he has been one of the important person in global forum to bring these kind of debates, and it is very important for us to listen him. And sir, your talks is very informative. I saw the PowerPoint and all this, so well thought of and so informative. I was just keenly watching your presentation, listening you. It is very thought provoking. And thank you so much. And thank all our participants, Dr. Patrick Taran, Dr. Raj Bordoli, Paddy, and all our participants, and everybody from different countries to make the conversation more informative, more enriching. And thank you all. I'll be sharing the PPT with you all, all the participants. And thank you, Professor Dr. Piyasiri, once again. It is our honor to have you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm very grateful you all listened to my long presentation. I felt very embarrassed sometimes. to make
No, it is very informative, sir. Very informative, thoughtful, engaging. So we enjoyed it.
If you have any questions, you can still send me by
Yes,
email.
yes,
I will
yes,
be happy
yes.
to respond. And also, I have made some slight changes in the presentation, which I will share with Sada for circulation to you all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Patty, any concluding comments?
Nothing much to say except to just thank Dr. Piasiri for for that elaborate presentation. I think he's given us a lot of inspiration, even for for forthcoming special lectures. And maybe just a special thanks to those who join us also as special panelists, as side panelists, as I would call them. Really an inspiration, I think, and a great opportunity for the students that we have joining us on this course. I think one should not take for granted the level of information and the level of engagement that you're getting here. I think it's a world standard. So thank you very much.
Thank you all.